Little town, it's a quiet village, every day like the one before. Little town full of little people, waking up to say, oh, hi there! Today we're going to talk about a tale as old as time. Autistic people being labeled as quirky and weird without any further thought as to the very obvious explanation of why that is. Isn't it just lovely? In case you have not guessed, we're talking about Belle today. I'm very excited about it. She was my favorite princess for most of my life before she tied with Ariel, and then there was a three-way tie with Rapunzel, but now it's definitely just Anastasia for reasons that we'll get into another day. I'm saving that one. But anyway, so Belle is cookie cutter autistic, like the absolute perfect example of this. And as we always do in my Princess Profile series, we're going to talk about her origins and the original story of Beauty and the Beast in comparison to the Disney version we all know and mostly love, and then what makes her specifically autistic. We're also going to discuss the live action one as well because I have opinions, and doing this, of course, is not to randomly diagnose people. That's not the move. We are not about forcing labels onto people we don't know, but instead this is a way for us to look at autistic coded characters and humanize them a bit and understand why they are in fact representations of autism so that we can see types of autism that aren't straight white cis teen boys who like trains. Because I think we've all seen enough of that. Also, image description, for my blind low vision friends, I am in my usual spot with a mirror behind me on my right, leaves on my left, tiny dog paintings in the middle on the wall behind me, and of course, my outfit is a Belle cosplay because why would I miss an opportunity to dress up like a Disney princess despite me doing that literally every day? I wanted to do the yellow off-the-shoulder dress that she typically is known for, and there is a very specific dress from the pretty dress that I've had bookmarked for about a year and a half or so because I really want it, but it's never available in my size, so I don't own it yet, which meant that I went for Townfolk Belle instead, which is a long sleeve white shirt and blue bodice, and my hair is like middle parted and pulled back twisty. Yeah, if anybody knows how to convince the pretty dress to bring back their dress in a UK 10, I will love you forever. But anyway, if you've forgotten the plot of Beauty and the Beast, the 1991 film begins with a young prince who is simply vibing in his castle, but also just being in general, you know, not so nice. So when there's a bad storm and an enchantress disguised as an old hag seeks shelter, he turns her away and she promptly curses him to be a beast and all of the humans in his palace to become objects, sentient objects. And when the last petal falls off of the enchanted rose, the curse becomes permanent. And honestly, gotta respect the pettiness, I really do, but also why did everybody else in the castle have to face consequences for my dude's bad behavior? I mean, that seems unfair. Also, group punishment is against the Geneva Convention. But I also don't think that your local enchantress would know that. Also, it takes place like 200 years before the Geneva Convention was actually created. So I guess it's fine. Anyway, so yeah, he's a beast, and everybody is a sentient object. It's really weird. And speaking of weird, we have a 17-year-old girl at the same time. She is very beautiful and very strange because she is literate, the horror, and her name is Belle, and she has very good outfits. She and her inventor dad, whose name is Maurice, are the oddballs of the village to the point where there's a 5-minute song at the beginning of the movie about how she doesn't fit in, but it's okay, because she's pretty. And also we have Mr. Himbo himself, Gaston, who doesn't have a brain cell to his name, but he really wants to marry Weird Girl because Weird Girl is pretty. But she says no because she does have brain cells, and he gets mad and sad, and so his sidekick, LeFou, sings a whole song about how Gaston is the best to make him feel better. But it's also very much a bop, and also, I think that if Gaston were like a better person, he and LeFou would make a very cute couple. But anyway, so Belle's dad has to go to a place to do a thing in a place that's far away. So he travels by horse, but along the way he gets lost and he ends up finding himself in the dark forest with scary wolves, and then he finds a castle where he decides to wait out the storm because that makes sense. But then the beast gets mad because how dare this poor old man trespass upon his very massive and empty castle, so he decides to imprison him forever. Which is dramatic as heck, but you do you, babe. So then Belle is like, yo, where's my dad? And then his horse appears, and she's like, hello? So she hops onto the horse, and it magically leads her to the castle, where her father is imprisoned. Good for you, horse. She enters and finds her dad, and is salty and low-key yells at the beast, and then she sets her father free and decides to take his place to be imprisoned. Maurice runs back to the village like, hey, come help me kill the beast to save my daughter. And they're all like, bestie, what? And in the meantime, the living objects at the castle are fully aware that the curse will be broken, and they'll be human again if the beast falls in love with someone. And now there's a pretty young lady in the palace, and since everything's heteronormative, she must be the one. So they give her a room and they try to make her happy and comfy. And eventually the beast develops empathy after a few very frightening outbursts, and they they work it out by bonding over books, and the vibes become decent. And then they have a romantic dinner and a dance together, and the song Being the Beast is sung. It's really great. But then the beast gives her a magic mirror so she can see anything anywhere in the world, and she chooses to see her father, but the thing is he'd gone after her alone because nobody believed him, so she sees Maurice just like collapsed in a forest, not doing too hot, and the beast lets her free to go save her father, giving her the mirror as a gift, because he loves her, and she goes after her dad and brings him back to the village. But Gaston has this idea that if he convinces people that Maurice is crazy and gets him institutionalized, he can marry Belle, as if Belle has no autonomy over herself without her father, which she has proven time and time again is not true. But okay, sure. So she uses the mirror to say, hey, the beast is real. My dad's not insane. But then Gaston is like, you love him. Ew. Also, beast, let me go get some more clout. And so then he locks Belle and her dad in the basement, and then they gather a group of townspeople, and they go to the castle to try and kill the beast. Luckily, Belle and Maurice escape and rush to the castle too. There's a whole spicy, fun battle that, goes on. Gaston dies. Beast dies in Belle's arms. She professes her love for him. The curse is lifted, and he becomes a very nice-looking and also very alive prince. And everybody else becomes human again, and then they live happily ever after. The end. Now, the live-action one is pretty much the same plot, but a lot more convoluted to fill screen time with a lot of random extra plot points and songs that really did not need to exist at all. Also, Belle's voice is just entirely auto-tuned. Like, I love Emma Watson, but why didn't they cast somebody who can sing? Also, they decided to make the movie way darker. Like, they wanted to make it extra clear that Gaston is the villain by making him try to kill Maurice himself. And also, the collective trauma of everybody in that castle was really just oozing from the screen, and it was a little aggressive. But all this made better by the fact that anytime Audra McDonald opens her mouth, butterflies just come out, so I was painting at the same time, which made it better than just sitting in a movie theater and watching it, and I could sing along to avoid the bad auto-tune songs. So overall, I genuinely did have a good time. I did hate it in theaters though, I will acknowledge that. Also, the dress that Emma Watson wears at the end is to die for, and I would like to own it, please. Thank you. So anyway, what is the original pre-Disney version of this story? I discovered that a lot of the random plot changes that really annoyed me and I thought drew out the story way too much in the live action were actually references and slight changes to the same event happening in the original story. So maybe I should have been a little bit less mad. I'm not going to be though. So anyway, like all other fairy tales we've covered thus far, there are a gazillion different versions and they're all like spoken things across continents, across centuries, etc. Some traces of this one are all the way back to ancient Rome, but the first published and documented version of this story was in 1740, written by a lady named Gabrielle Suzanne Babot de Villeneuve, with the most famous version of it, La Belle et la Bête, published in 1750 by Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont. I love how French just doesn't sound like words. But it's in France, in case you couldn't tell by that. But anyway, so we're going to talk about the Beaumont version because that's not majorly different from Villeneuve, and it's the one that Disney's version is based off of. And here's the deal. Stories by Beaumont were weird. Like when it comes to fairy tales, pretty used to weird at this point, but her stuff just kind of has all of her stories have the message of, you should submit to your husband, it's the wisest of decisions, otherwise you'll be brutally murdered or tortured, and it's your fault because you weren't a perfect little housewife. But then, at the same time, if you look under the surface level messaging, you kind of realize there are characters who don't experience all that are the ones who were more judicious and picky in choosing their husbands from the beginning. Those who went for beauty or wealth had bad outcomes, and those who went for virtue didn't. So, I guess you could call it a feminist story. I guess. I'm not quite sure how much I buy into that, but okay, sure. So, the original story. Yes, so there's a widower merchant dude who has 3 sons and 3 daughters, and they're all quite pretty, but the youngest daughter is named Little Beauty because she was the prettiest, and the name kind of stuck, hence why her name is Belle, which means beauty in French. She is the most lovely as well as kind, well-read, and pure of heart, while every other member of her family, with the exception of her father, I think. Tones are really hard for me to read in French, but they're all really greedy and mean and selfish and spoiled and gross. But then the merchant loses most of his ships and therefore wealth in a storm, and so they all have to squish into a tiny cottage, and then, work, which the other siblings are just not vibing with. Belle, on the other hand, decides to try and make light of the situation and try to enjoy her more rural life while her siblings don't. And also they think that she's stupid for acting the way that she's acting rather than being like, oh, she's trying to make things better in this situation. Now, a few years later, one of the ships magically turns up at port. So her father, Dearest, decides to go to it. But before he leaves, he asks each kid if they want anything, and the siblings ask for the finest clothing and jewels and all that good stuff. And Belle asks only that he return safely. But then he's like, okay, great, but like, for real, I want to bring you something. What do you want? So she asks for a rose because, well, they don't grow in their part of the country. Now the merchant goes and he finds that his ship's cargo has been seized to pay his debts, which makes sense. So he's still penniless and he can't get any gifts for his kids. On his return trip, he gets lost in a storm and he stumbles upon a castle, which he decides to go into so that he doesn't die in the storm. And he finds it completely abandoned with food on the table and a fire in the fireplace and whatnot, and he stays the night and decides that, well, since it's abandoned, he'll just take his castle as his own and bring his kids to join him, which is really weird. But then he remembered that Belle wanted a rose and he saw a rose garden, so he went to pluck one. But then our beast friend appears and tries to kill him because he's mad, which is a little over dramatic, but sure. And then dad is like, well, I'm just trying to get a rose for my beautiful daughter. And so the beast decides that the dad can go home and give the rose to Beauty, but only if the guy brings back one of his daughters to take his place. But also he can't lie to them about what the situation is. He has to tell them the complete and total truth, which is weirdly kind, but sure. So Father Dearest, he's salty, but he decides to do the thing. He agrees to it, and the beast gives him fine clothing and jewels to bring back, and off he goes. At home, he tells everybody in the family what happened. The brothers all say they're gonna go fight and kill the beast, and the sisters all refuse to leave, and they're like, Belle, this is obviously your fault for wanting a rose, so like, you should be the one sacrificed. And it's all really strange, but Belle, you know, she just decides to do it anyway. Cool? So she heads out to the castle where she's met with, and no, this is not a joke, fireworks entwining their initials. Also fancy clothes and food, and the beast has lots of long conversations with her, and the overall vibe is that he's lonely and not too bright. He's not evil, he's just not smart. So every night he asks Belle to marry him, and every night she refuses, but she also keeps having dreams of some lovely, beautiful prince that she falls for and is convinced that the beast must be hiding this prince somewhere in the castle, so she goes on many adventures around the building and the grounds to try and find him. She happily vibes in the castle for a few months with all of her needs more than met, but decides that for some reason she misses her really awful family and wishes to return home, which he allows as long as she returns 2 months later. So she goes home, everybody is jealous of her because she looks cool and rich and even extra pretty and whatnot, especially because all of the people who were dating the sisters all started to vie for Belle's love because she's prettier. So like, that's rough. But then her father convinces her to stay longer than the allotted 2 months, so that's what she does. But then she has a vision of the beast alone and dying on the castle grounds, and so she goes back and she finds that her vision was true and is sad because it makes her realize that she actually loves him now that he's dying. So she agrees to marry him and then continues to take care of him so he doesn't die. And then the next morning wakes up to see that he has turned into the prince from her dreams, and they get married and live happily ever after. The end. I'm not sure how Disney got their version of the story from that, but because they clearly changed like every aspect of it, but good for them. Let's talk about the autism bit. So what traits of this character make her autistic? I mean, as always, to begin with, we have the let's say it together, everybody. A girl who is smart, quick-witted, and a go-getter who doesn't totally fit into social norms, but at the same time, people can't get mad at her because she is generic kind human who happens to be friends with anything and everything and is kind all the time, even to random animals. Chameleon people-pleasing personality, that's autism, baby. But also she has a clear special interest, and that is reading. She goes through books at atypical speed, reads the same ones over and over and over and over again because, well, she loves them and they bring her comfort, and she's unable to connect with the beast until they can both talk about books. She also completely hyper-focuses on this special interest, with other people noting constantly that she's always kind of spaced out and dreaming and either focused on a book or just kind of existing in her own rich inner world. Obviously, there is the chicken or the egg kind of question. Is she ostracized because she hyper-focused on reading, or does she hyper-focus on reading because she's ostracized and lonely? That we may never know. She also typically follows the exact same routine every single day to the point where it becomes routine and comforting enough that she feels a desire to actually branch out into new experiences and try new things. Part of that daily routine includes completing her necessary social expectations, like, asking how somebody's doing, being polite, walking through town, doing the basic shopping things, etc. Once she has checked that off of the to-do list, she goes right back to her own little universe happily. Also, in the original version, she can talk to animals, which is really great, and her father is literally the absent-minded professor trope, to a T, and at least in the live action clearly shows his lack of understanding of social norms and just blatant disdain for them. So there's that. And then lastly, we do need to talk about the Stockholm Syndrome thing, because there are two equally valid aspects to this argument. The first is that, she landed herself in an abusive situation and that it ended up turning into love, but I'm very suspicious of that, and I don't know how much of that is just her kind of becoming dependent on him and therefore feeling like she loves him even when she doesn't, which finding yourself in a controlling and or abusive situation and just kind of rolling with it because you don't notice red flags and can be over trusting almost to a fault is a very autistic thing that should be discussed and will be in a video up here. Yes. But another thing on another level is seeing the good in people and treating people as if they are good people, no matter what, from the beginning is also a very common autistic trait. And that has been shown to be significantly less common in allistic or non-autistic people. And that by seeing the good in him, he began to realize that maybe he isn't a monster. And he began to unpack that and actually grow as a being into a nice and caring and empathetic person. And I don't think that that's impossible for him or for anybody else. And I also think that she deserves better, but at the end of the day, I do think that it ended up being kind of a nice and healthy relationship. I mean, statistically, that's almost never going to happen in the real world, but good for them, I guess. Also, I don't think Belle is just being swept along for the ride. I mean, we saw how she stood up and yelled at Gaston and the Beast, and I feel like she really wouldn't take any BS from him, but I also am not in that situation, so I cannot speak for her. She is also a cartoon, or an auto-tuned Emma Watson, but either way, mostly a cartoon. So that's all I have to say about all of that. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. Are there any autistic traits that I missed? What princess should I do next? I'm tentatively leaning towards Mulan, but we'll see. How did you feel about the live action version? Also, if you've seen the 1946 French Beauty and the Beast film and want to talk about how truly horrific it is, please let me know. I have not suffered alone with having to watch this adaptation because that one stuck in my brain. And as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for learning. Remember, it is never too late to start over, and I look forward to seeing you, my dear, in the next one.